Okay. Just in time. I finished it just in time. Are your glasses clean as they should be?
Well, that's a struggle, but I can see.
You know, because the ocean needs more microplastics in it. That's clearly the thought there. They have those little lens cleaner rub wipes that you can buy at like Walgreens and other pharmacies here in the States. And yeah, I like my glasses clean, but also don't know if
You
we
don't
need
want to feel
plastic to
guilty
do it.
about it.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
I was just wiping it on my shirt, so I think that's
no,
probably
you did the right thing.
that's ecologically fairly sound.
Yeah, that's what we used to do in the old days before we had microplastics for disposable plastics for our
Right.
glasses. And I don't know about you, but my glasses get schmutzy, once or twice a day. It's not like I want to do that every day.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
The struggle is real. So are you back in the States? You're in Sydney,
no,
right?
I'm in Sydney. Let me change my. Yeah. Sydney is. Let me change my. This is from the last live stream. Hold on. Save. Yeah. Okay. There we go. I changed my subtitle for. I've got my name and my title. So it's early in the morning for you. What time is it now? Is it 9 or 10?
8:20. Yeah.
8. It's 8:20.
Yeah. So it's everybody's ready to go.
What'd you say?
Izzy's gone to school.
What time is it?
Sarah's having breakfast. 8:20. Yeah,
okay,
you're right.
But is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're 11. Is that right? It's 19:20 here. Yeah, it's 11 hours behind, which is, insane to me. Okay, let me see here. Say again. I'm gonna remove my camera to see if I can make my internet better here. Okay, bear with me.
Yeah, you're pixelating.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can. I could hear you fine. I think you had a problem with me.
Okay, yeah. Maybe you can remove your camera so I don't have to download so much, because the internet here has been
yeah, sure.
less than
easy.
super duper.
Settings.
Sorry, man. There we go. Okay. Because remember, this is going to be a podcast. I'll put a little thing here on the screen. Dear viewers, Josh's internet is being cantankerous. Please enjoy this made-for-TV audio podcast. I don't know what that means. Okay, here we go. And then put that right there. There we go. Okay. So anyway, I'm despite the lack of video, you are the good, the great, the amazing, the inimitable Dr. David Syer. Do you prefer Dave or David?
I get both, but mostly Dave.
Okay, Dave, Dr. Dave Syer.
I don't know how to practice. I was always when I was growing up, I was always David. So I'm David to the family.
Surely, yeah. I mean, especially mom and dad, right?
And then as soon as I went, so I used to live in the north of England, in Durham.
Yeah.
And there are no Daves up there.
You're English?
There are no Daves in the north of England. So you have to go south. So as soon as I went to London, I became Dave.
Wait. So are you saying that the frequency of Daves is inversely correlated to the frequency of Reliant Robins?
Could be, yeah. It's more of a latitude effect, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought they were more common in the north, right? Like,
I think they probably are. Yes.
Yeah. Well, anyway. So okay, you are. I put it in the video.
I don't know if there are any Reliant Robins left. Actually, they probably all just rusted into piles of
reliantness. Anyway. Well, they are reliant. I mean, you can trust them.
Yeah, I think that was a marketing thing. Yeah.
They'll endure. Look, I'm really happy you're here. Either way, so you are the co-founder of Springbatch. How did that work, by the way? That was I mean, we've talked about this before. We won't rehash it too much, but that was at Accenture, and
it was Accenture from quite early on, but actually it was it was Rob Harrop's idea, and
Yeah.
he and I had been doing some consulting at Morgan Stanley, and they were doing something similar, right? They had their own little batch framework, and so
Sure.
we kind of helped them to get their transaction boundaries right in that. And then basically they were quite keen to have an open source project that did what they just spent all their precious hours doing. So they encouraged us to do it, and basically Rob gifted it to me. And then I found Accenture were doing this something similar as well, so we teamed up with them.
Okay. Is that what informed the second, like Spring Batch 2.0 was a major refactoring, right? You introduced chunks and all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Accenture were in at the beginning, so they were behind. They were like 50% of the code was written by Lucas and 50% by me for version 1. I think version 2, they was definitely still in the picture, but yeah, that was exactly when we introduced chunking and remote execution, stuff like that.
That's a great project. But I only mentioned that because I was just doing the video and all the cool stuff, and there was Spring Batch, what is it, 5.2 or 6.2, something like that. So yeah, it's big, big release, bigly. Yeah, so many cool new additions there. And then not one to rest on your laurels. You co-created Spring Boot, a little thing about which I'm sure some of our audience has heard. And then a couple years later, Spring Cloud, and you were certainly involved in a dozen other initiatives, but recently, this is why you're here. This is why I've summoned you to the principal's office, is because you have this new thing called Spring gRPC. What's going on? What is this?
Yeah, and so very glad to see that you spelled it correctly.
I can't do much, but
capital RPC. So I suppose you have to whisper.
It's the G is silent.
Remote procedure calls.
Yeah.
Yes. gRPC. So gRPC, I guess, if people are unaware, is yeah, it's an efficient RPC protocol. It sort of I think it only goes over HTTP, but it's basically protobufs exchanged over HTTP in an extended ecosystem, which is very polyglot, so people like it for that. And so the name of the game is you write it's like any RPC, you write your language language independent abstraction for the remote procedure that you want to call. It's called, and that's in a protobuf format. And then you generate some code. You can generate Java, you can generate JavaScript, you can generate Go, Python, whatever you want. So that's one of the things that people like about it. You could write your server in Spring, and then you could contact it with whatever language you like. Anyway, so that's gRPC, and there are some Java libraries for it because you can generate Java code to implement the server and the client for gRPC.
Right.
And so that's called gRPC Java, and that's published by Google, and it's very stable and feature complete, and you can quite quickly run up a server or a client and hook it up to your protobuf files without any help from Spring. So for a long time, we kind of let the ecosystem evolve and decide, let people do the quick thing with the native gRPC libraries.
Right.
And in the background, so 1 or 2 or maybe 3 Spring Boot auto configuration platform projects sort of evolved independently of us.
Yeah.
And so people start using them, and I think there are companies who write their own and don't publish them as well. So people have found that, as usual, the native library is great, but it doesn't go quite as far as Spring would in terms of convenience, auto configuration, rapid developer productivity features that
Right.
Spring offers. So you can always add a little bit, and it is a little bit. There isn't very much missing from the Google libraries, but there's just that last mile. And the ecosystem projects, the ones that are out there, I'm sure that they're perfectly fine, but I think our users are a little bit, some of our users are a little bit nervous using them. I think you did a feature on one of them a while ago. I don't know if it was a YouTube thing or a podcast thing, but I remember seeing some comments on your blog saying, oh, I'd really like to use this, but I don't trust it because it might, I don't know the authors, which is,
yeah.
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it doesn't matter how good the code is, and most of those existing ecosystems are pretty good, actually. You just don't know if it's always going to be there. So we have decided that it might be time to try it from a Spring project's point of view. So we haven't committed fully to that yet. We're still in the experimental phase officially. So, there's this GitHub
Spring Project Experimental.
Spring Projects Experimental. Yeah, Spring minus Projects minus Experimental. And so we have a Spring gRPC project there. I guess you can put
Spring dash or Spring minus gRPC.
Notes. Yeah. And we're publishing releases to Maven Central. So we've had 3 releases so far, and we're getting actually quite close to feature complete. I think we might be ready for 1.0, but we won't commit to that until we're sure that people are going to use it, basically, because what's the point otherwise? So we're waiting for people to start using it. So that's one reason why I'm very happy to be here talking to you, because people will hear about it. Yeah.
Well, I sure hope so. I'm gonna surely I'll do a demo of this, of course, but basically it's like you said, there's you can't really escape the core workflow. You're gonna start contract first, which I think is very much in keeping with the Spring I don't know, style or idiom, whatever, right? Actually, it's kind of contradictory. We had the remote exporters, remember all those? And that was like interface first. But then we also had Spring WS and the Spring GraphQL support, and in all those cases you're building the schema first. And so I guess this is another one in the column of schema first.
It's a bit like that. And
you're building a protobuf file, which is basically like a ISDL for protobuf RPC services, right?
Yeah,
and then you have to run through that.
The UX chain and the endpoints which manipulate them. So you basically get an interface and the types in Java terms.
Right. So do you have to show people how to set that up to get the compiler to automatically generate the Java code?
I mean, I don't see that as being anything to do with us, because there are other tools that do that, right? So the ecosystem for protobuf, and so there's a protobuf compiler, right? Proto-C.
Yeah.
And it has a whole bunch of plugins, including Java code generation, and we don't really need to get involved in that. So we basically start at the point where you've generated your Java code, and it's on your class path.
And so and by the way, Proto-C has plugins. So one of the companies you mentioned earlier that some companies have gone down this path and built things that served their use cases and maybe little else. One of the companies that did a pretty interesting cut at this some years ago, many years ago now, right? Was do you remember the old Salesforce, the reactive Salesforce one?
Oh gosh, yeah, that was protobuf, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe I'm like the AI hallucinating it, but I feel like that was what it was. Anyway, this is.
That. Yeah, you get plugins for things like validation, so you can do automated validation. I've seen a plugin for gateway generation, for reverse proxy, which, by the way, people should know has been a feature of Spring Cloud Gateway for some time. I don't know how many people use it, but it's there. Yeah, it's quite useful, in fact. So that's if you have JSON and you want to call a gRPC endpoint. So gRPC works with protobufs, and that's a binary format. It's not very friendly for humans.
Right.
If you wanted to call it with JSON, then you could put a gateway in front of it, and Spring Gateway does that for you.
Ah, okay. And so in this case, you're just mapping, the normal inputs that people are expecting and adapting them to your high performance backend services.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
it's the performance is the main thing about gRPC, really. I mean, people say that it's highly performant, but whatever. It's binary data.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Less, the compiler can do more to foreclose upon execution paths because we know what the shape of the thing is.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. It's certainly very flexible, right? It supports streaming, supports not streaming, async.
It's like sort of halfway
Fine, forget.
between normal HTTP JSON exchange and sort of request response is one of the channels.
Yeah.
And they also have a streaming channels. So it's not as fully featured as our socket, but it's much more ubiquitous. So I guess more people use it.
And I do like the idea of schema first. I do think that's a valuable thing to do. It's a pain for one service. If you're just building one service talking to a client, it'll feel like overkill. But now that
as soon as you've got a whole ecosystem of them, then
yes,
it becomes quite valuable. I think that's why people like Netflix use it.
Yeah, now that I've GraphQL pilled, it's very hard to go back to a schema-free world,
Right. Yeah.
It just feels so much better knowing that's there. It's better for me as a consumer. It's better for others who are prospective consumers.
Yeah.
And it's better for me as a service provider as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the usage model is you set up the plugin or you just run the command yourself or whatever. I mean, if it's a fixed endpoint, if it's like a stable service, then you're not going to need to regenerate the client side stubs every single time. You could just do it once and then
you could just do it once and put it in a library. But yeah, I think it's probably most common is you just keep the protobufs in your code base and just generate them as needed.
Yeah. And then once you've got that, you've got is that an abstract type or what? Like, what is the thing?
So the way the Java plugin works for Proto-C, you get, when you run it against your protobuf definitions, you get a service definition for the server, and you get a stub. They call it a stub on the client side, and so those you don't really need to know about the server side very much. But what it does is it calls out to an interface, which is a generated interface, and what you have to do is implement that interface.
Yes. Okay.
So, with the types that have been generated from your code, there are methods with the signatures, including those types, and you just have to implement that interface. On the client side, it's much, much easier. You just create a channel from their APIs and plug it into the it's not even an abstract class, it's a concrete class, and you've got a client that can talk to your server. So for the server, so now we get into the Spring stuff, I suppose. What is Spring adding to this?
Well, yeah, and also the client. How do you get it to look like the same, the interface on the server side?
Well, it's generated to look like that.
Okay.
It uses the same types. So it literally shares the same Java types.
Okay. Cool.
If you have
Spring side.
If you have the same protobuf file on the client and the server, then you're guaranteed to have the same Java types. And the way protobuf works, you can evolve the server because independently of the client to some extent, because if you add a field, it always just appends it to the binary. So they can always read earlier versions of their.
Oh, right. There's ordering in the fields as well, right? Like
the types. Yeah. So that's right. Yeah. So each field is numbered, and your numbers always increase or something. But it's not as painful as you might think.
No.
Sharing types between client and server.
Well,
discipline, and the discipline in this case is enforced by the protobufs, basically.
Right, which seems reasonable to me. And you get validation that you've broken something, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Because if you regenerate the client against the schema that has changed incompatibly, you'll see the break.
Yeah.
Whereas
You'll see it in
before,
the Java compiler. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
yeah, super good. Big fan. Nice stuff. Is this? I don't know. Where does this fit? Is this something you would use on Spring Boot Starter Web or WebFlux?
We
Or
hope
not?
eventually both. So most people use gRPC with Java using the Google server. So it's not WebFlux, but it is Netty. So there's
Okay.
a Netty server that starts up using the APIs that they provide. But they also provide, which is quite interesting, a servlet. JavaX or Jakarta these days servlet. Which acts as a gateway for a gRPC. So basically, you can embed a gRPC app inside your Spring Web Tomcat, right? Whatever Spring Web you're doing, you can just add a servlet, and then you've got a gRPC service as well, listening
Is
on
that
the
like a
same
dispatcher
port.
servlet for gRPC?
It's like a dispatcher servlet for gRPC, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly what it is. And so it's generic, and then therefore we can auto-configure it for you in Spring gRPC. So if you have a servlet application and you just drop Spring gRPC into it, then it will find all of your endpoints and expose them.
Well, that seems. Oh, so you wait? You
nice.
just drop Spring gRPC. Wait, say that again. So you take.
Yeah, just drop Spring gRPC. There's a Spring Boot auto configure jar for Spring gRPC. If you just drop that in a Spring Web application, then it will find all of your gRPC service definitions and expose them.
Oh, super! So it's like Spring MVC or Spring GraphQL or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. It's auto configured. Yeah. We definitely could do the same thing with WebFlux, but nobody has contributed the code for that yet. I was kind of waiting for somebody to do that, but in principle, it'll be the same pattern, right?
Yeah, and it's sort of sensible. It is sensible to start, I think, with the thing that'll be most applicable. Though I would have qualified. I mean, there are more people using the servlet stack by far at this point, right? But it. And 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have qualified that with, but it might be less scalable. But now in the world of virtual threads, does that mean anything anymore? Is that not? I mean, you might get very good scalability
that's
with this
relevant. Too. Yeah, I don't think it's relevant to the gRPC services. They'll benefit from virtual threads for sure, and if anything does, then they will. Yeah, so it's an interesting use case, right? So that servlet is provided by Google. It's in the gRPC Java stack. So all we do is just grab it and auto configure it.
Okay, that works. And so the beans that are being auto configured to be exported, what are they? They are the implementations of the generated types, or
yeah. So the way the server works for our auto configuration, basically any bean by type. So there's a base type for all of the Java service definitions. All of the generated code has a base class. I think it's called bindable service or something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it. So any bean of that type basically will be exposed, and they carry their own metadata. So if you provide an implementation of the interface that is generated by the tooling, and just put @service on it, right, in Spring terms, that's it. And your component scan will create a bean, and then you've got an endpoint.
Now, I mean, you and I both know conceptually, in the stereotypical UML sense, they need to be services, but do they actually have to be services? Could I just do @component?
Oh yeah, that would work too. Sure. Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, I've just stereotypically labeled it @service. We also actually have a specialized @gRPC service, so you could do that. And the advantage of doing that is that you can. It's a bit like a Spring integration endpoint, right? Or a Spring retry annotation. You can add interceptors and things like that to the to the service definition. So
Oh,
imagine like a servlet has filters, a gRPC service potentially has interceptors. So you might want to do Spring security, for instance, in an interceptor.
wait. Okay, so that's a good point. So wait, where do I specify that, in the annotation, or is
You
there
can, yeah. So well, you can do it globally. You could just define a bean of type service interceptor. So that's easy. But if you wanted to do it a different interceptor per service, then you can annotate with @gRPC service, and then you can give a list of bean definition names or class names, and we'll instantiate them for you. So you can sort of
like class literals, like foo interceptor.
Yeah, class literals. So I think probably bean names are nicer because it gives you the chance to configure it better, right? But you have the option of doing both. And we kind of borrowed those ideas from existing ecosystem projects, so we know people kind of are familiar with the pattern.
So if they provide, yeah, that makes sense. If they provide the class literal, do you just look up the bean by that type in the context, basically?
I think so, yeah. And then if that fails, we'll just create one.
Okay.
The default constructor.
Super duper good. I'm liking this a lot. And if it's a bean name, you could just have a public static final string and use that as the bean ID for the bean definition of this interceptor.
So I think we already do that, and we copied those ideas from other places in Spring where people do that. Like I think Spring Batch has interceptors that work like that, and Spring Integration does, and Spring Retry.
Nice.
Like yeah.
Now you just mentioned security. I confess I didn't imagine this was already so far along as to have that integration. Do tell.
I'm still working on that, actually. So I've got some. There's a branch on my fork that we call Secure that has some ideas in it. It's conceptually relatively simple, though. I mean, like it's just gRPC already is quite secure. It prefers to work with TLS and mutual TS. TLS is therefore kind of the most obvious. What do you call it? Granular RPC style, RBAC style authentication that you could. So people use MTLS a lot already, and they can already do that, right? So that's already built into the Google libraries. They just have to. So we have provided Spring Boot configuration properties. So you know how I can't remember which version of Spring Boot it was. It must have been 2.2
versions.
They added bundles? SSL bundles, yeah. So we've latched onto that, and so you can define an SSL bundle on the server if you just want server-side TLS, or on the client and the server if you want both. And then you have to tell the server to check the certificates coming in, right? And then you've got the people who we didn't have to do anything for that. We just have to configure the SSL bundle, basically.
And that was so for people who are joining us. The SSL bundle stuff is that now in Spring Boot, like a year or year and a half ago, I forget, but after 3.1, they added the ability to define centrally trust material like SSL certificates and public keys and this, that, and the rest. And you can just point Spring to that bundle wherever it's used, and it's used all over, right? Your database connections, your HTTP clients and services, and now gRPC.
You need some trust material, like you say, and so it's quite flexible as well. You can put it in Java, JKS format, or you can put it in text encoded format and stuff like that. So that's kind of a Spring Boot feature, and none of the existing ecosystem gRPC projects knew about that when they were written, so they weren't able to take advantage of it, but we were. So
I mean, to be fair, the great Scotty Frederick, he added that fairly recently. Like I said, it's only a year and a half or two. It couldn't be more than 2.
It's not when that long ago. I think it was 3.1. You're probably right. Anyway, so you can do that. Cool. You can do that already because all of the Spring Boot configuration feature is nice, but it's actually gRPC Java. The Google libraries provide the building blocks for that, for actually doing the authentication. So we didn't have to do anything for that. But what we could do, and we will do, is add a Spring security layer so that you can hook that into, app pre-authorize and all of the Spring security goodness. So if you've already done MTLS, you're good, and you have an authenticated client. So that's that in Spring security terms, that's called pre-authentication, right? So we can then add a authentication manager, authentication provider, to hook that into your RBAC database or whatever that is, right? So you've got a store of daily data for users and their roles and permissions and everything. So you have to make that connection. User detail service, exactly. Yeah. So you have to. Yeah. That isn't a concept that is native in gRPC.
So this is so cool.
We can add that quite easily, and then once we've done that, then it's easy to see that we could do things like OAuth tokens, JOP tokens. We could do basic authentication. We could do anything that you do over HTTP, basically.
So you've got first of all, are you going to build one of those nice configurers for
that's kind of what I'm getting my head around now. I find those things very hard to understand, but I suppose
yes,
I'll do my best and try and copy one of them into gRPC.
But once they work,
once they work, they're good. Yeah, no,
they're brilliant.
Especially the recent changes in Spring Security 6, where they've added they've added Lambda versions and deprecated the old chain builders. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm working on that right now, basically. So
can I brag a little bit?
Sorry, yeah.
Can I brag just a little bit?
Please do.
I am the one that asked about those Lambda methods, and Eleftheria Stein added them years ago, but I'm the one who's like, hey, why don't we do this?
Very good.
Yeah, I don't do much, but I know how to bother Rob Winch.
You know how to bother people. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's my skill. But ask Rob. I don't contribute much to his day. In fact, it's a net negative, but that I did help inspire.
Anyway, so I think once we've got that security feature in place, we'll be pretty much where we want to be in terms of 1.0. So it would be great if people started using it and gave us some feedback.
Yeah, so you mentioned having JOT tokens. Is there, they just added token exchange to the REST client, which is it's basically the same thing that we had in the template for years now, right? Is there something like that? Is there like a client that you might build, or do we have to use the official client?
It would be the same kind of idea, right? And so instead of a REST template, it has client interceptors, right? HTTP interceptors, whatever they're called. And in gRPC, there's a client interceptor as well, and so we could just provide one of those out the box that picks up the security principal, Spring security principal, from the local thread or wherever it is, and turns it into a JOT, right? Sends that.
Yeah. No, yes, that's great. But I'm saying, second from that, in addition to that, is it possible to have a dynamic client, or does it have to be the code-generated interface? Like a client that you could automatically build up the request?
Yeah, you could, right? The Java APIs exist for that. I don't think many people do it that way. That's the way that the Spring Cloud Gateway thing works. They don't need a protobuf. Also, they don't need the generated code. They need the protobuf, right? You need the protobuf because it has the schema. You need to inspect it and find all the types and names of the fields.
Yeah.
But so you could make a generic client, because that's kind of what the gateway does already.
Okay. Any chance that could get added to Spring gRPC?
Yeah. Well, I've thought about it. So if you think that's a good feature, come along and vote for it.
Yeah. I only.
What would people use it for? Why would you want a generic client? Because I don't think it would be difficult. I just wonder if it would be useful.
I just don't know that I think if you're just going to call one endpoint, having to enforce the build time plugin, and you have to bring this into your code path, and if I have an otherwise non-gRPC project and I just want to call this thing, I just want to build it up like I
That's
can
an
with the REST
interesting
client.
idea. No, why don't you open an issue on GitHub and we'll
Okay.
see.
And we'll see. Yeah, that's a good. I like it.
I mean, the Java APIs exist to do that, right? They're already in the gRPC Java project. It's just so
Right.
you'd need access to the protobuf, but you
Sure.
wouldn't need the generated code. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, either way, I'm super excited about this project just because.
Actually, you can get the protobuf. You can get the protobuf from the server.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea. So they have a reflection endpoint, which out of the box from gRPC Java, it's optional, but if it's on the class path, guess what? We configure it for you. So you can get the protobuf from the server if it's set up the right way.
Is there actuator support? I mean,
yeah, actually,
kind of observability storage?
Chris Bono has been helping me, and he did a bang up job on that. So yeah, so gRPC has the notion of health endpoint already.
Right.
So all we did was hook. There's two ways of looking at this, right? And we did both. So one is to take the existing gRPC defined health endpoint and just hook it back into the Spring Boot actuators. So now it knows about the connection to your database and the connection to remote services and things like that.
Okay.
And there's the other way around. You could add, in the Spring Boot actuators, you can add a new health, what do you call them? I can't remember what you call them. Health indicator or something. Yeah. Saying whether your gRPC service is healthy. So it goes,
that's so cool. So gRPC clients will get their health that represents the aggregate state.
Yeah.
And HTTP clients will get the same thing.
Yeah.
That is super cool. Wow. Okay. Let me think about this. What else am I missing?
Just with that. That's already released. That was in 0.3.
That is super good. What about GraalVM? It's like, is that story? I remember you and I sat down.
That works fine.
I was bothering you.
Yeah, no, that works fine. I can't remember what the critical thing for that was, but that got. I think there was something in Netty that had to be pushed into the that community. Yeah, that visibility thing. Yeah, so that got solved a while ago actually, before we started this project. That works pretty well, I think.
Is there any AOT config?
Observability is really easy.
Yeah, the observability stuff is so. Yeah, are you emitting metrics and micrometer? And
yeah,
stuff, or?
Metrics, everything that Micrometer does basically, because they already had gRPC support. So all we had to do is configure it.
Oh, just it's so good. Oh, that's so good. Oh my goodness. Okay. So this is like a whole story. If you're a Spring user, you're gonna feel right at home using this, right? This is that's so good. It works for you've got observability. You'll have security soon. You've got AOT, which is super important for me, as you know, because if I can't GraalVM it, I can't use it. And then it's supported in a standard servlet environment. So, or is it possible to just use it as a standalone? Like I don't have any Spring Boot Starter Web or Spring Boot Starter Web Flex. It just starts by itself.
No, that's probably what most people would start with. If they were already using gRPC, they're already using the Google server, right? So yeah, that's auto-configured as well.
But that would make security weird when you do add that, because you have server HTTP security.
Well, it would mean that
filter chain
it was. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're adding security. It's as a feature to the product, right? Because otherwise we kind of wouldn't need to. If you were only using servlets, the Spring security is already perfect, right? There's nothing to add. So what we're adding, all the features I was describing earlier, that's added to the native Google server, not the Tomcat one.
Oh, that is actually a very gnarly undertaking. Godspeed to you, my friend. That sounds insane.
I noticed that you did some work a while ago on Spring integration and JOT tokens and application. So I think that's an unplowed field in Spring security, right? They've added some really basic support for non-web applications, but not much really. And so
exactly the resource server, but for everything else.
Yeah, for everything else, exactly. Yeah, you're a resource server, but you're not listening on HTTP. You're listening on Rabbit or
gRPC or RSocket or whatever.
So the building blocks for that are sort of in place, but nobody's actually built anything yet. So this is one of the first things to touch
Oh,
in
that's
that
so
area.
cool. That's so cool. What does that mean? You have to build a separate DSL? That's the part I'm confused about. Like, would it be another kind of security filter chain, or is
Yeah,
security
so
filter chain
it's a
tied
bit
up to the
like
HTTP stuff?
well, it's a bit like the difference between MVC and Webflux, right? That you get
Totally
a
different types.
builder that produces an interceptor of some, but there are different types because
Yeah.
Webflux and servlets are different. So in this case, in gRPC, you've got a builder that produces a server interceptor, which is a gRPC construct.
Interesting. So it is. I would have to. It's not going to be a security filter chain. It'll be a gRPC
server
interceptor chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just create a bean of that type
Right.
from an auto-configured server, or you let Spring Boot auto-configure it for you, right? If you're doing MTLS, then you probably won't do anything except add a user detail service.
Oh my god. Oh, that's so good. This is so good. This is like really. I think I'm going to try and use this in some of my demos now. This is actually. I wonder if I can get out a version of that demo.
It's cool. Yeah,
it is super cool.
Yeah, you have to sort of deal with the binary data problem, right? So you need to get a special client. You can't just use curl, and you can't use the browser. I don't know if I don't know if there's the equivalent of Postman and like a browser based.
I mean, do you remember our friend Toshiaki Maki-san? Maki-san from our team. He did that great client for RSocket. There's got to be something like that for. I'm sure there's gRPC curl or whatever.
gRPC URL, gRPC curl, whatever you call it. Yeah, that works for me. That's what I've been using for testing.
But now you're going to add JOT to it. Oh, good luck.
Yeah, that won't be easy.
Yeah, this is good. So what is I guess, how do people, like you mentioned, there's an endpoint by which you can access the schema. Does that, is there like a strategy or a story around schema registries for gRPC these days? Or I don't even know, what does that look like?
I don't know what people do. I mean, I guess it's in that category, right, where people might be sharing the schemas globally somewhere in some sort of registry. I mean, each service can optionally. There's a reflection endpoint, right, which is provided by Google that you can always expose.
Yeah. This is good. I can't wait to go find out more about it and use it. So let me see. Spring. Well, I mean, GitHub.com, Spring projects experimental -Spring /Spring gRPC. I'm going to place that right here again. You can get it on Maven Central though. You don't actually have to git clone it and build it.
Yeah, we've released Maven Central up to 0.3.0.
Okay, so if I just add that dependency management to get the dependencies.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody who goes to that link that you just posted will find in the README lots of instructions about how to get it. So
yeah, just not these instructions on how to set up the gRPC compiler plugin for Maven or Gradle.
Sure, but there are samples if anybody wants to. There's samples that have got both Maven and Gradle build files, so people can figure it out.
Samples. I'm going to copy and paste this right here. This is so good. It's so good. And yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I want, you know what I want? I want just one more thing.
A checkbox.
Yes. This is key. And by the way, this is actually nice because this is another post boot project, right? We've got Spring Modulate, we got Spring Cloud Data Flow, we got Spring Cloud, no particular order.
We've designed this one so that it could be split into two, and half of it could go into boot. Like could be subsumed at some point, but that's for other people to decide. Sure. So you can use it independently, basically is what I'm saying. It has some core features and then it has some Spring Boot configuration. It's like the way that Spring AI arranged itself talking about post-boot projects.
Yeah.
It's the same structure that Spring AI has.
This is so good. You've now built 2 of the most consequential post-boot projects. Would you ever go back to doing under boot kind of projects? I think it's very hard to give up this level of abstraction once you've gotten a taste for
Yeah,
everything.
I don't know. Yeah, I like abstractions as well.
Yeah. Okay, this has been fun. Where do look? I know where people can find more about this. Where do people find out more about you?
GitHub.com. I'm dsyer, and
Okay.
on Blue Sky, I'm at dsyer.com.
Oh, that's brilliant. I didn't know that. Okay, hold on. And so Blue Sky. Let me go find you on the skies that are blue. How do you like Blue Sky, by the way? I'm quite liking it.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, it's. I mean, there was a big surge in membership a few weeks ago, wasn't there? So I was part of
Yeah.
that, and yeah, all the people
too.
that I used to like following in Twitter and then couldn't find anymore are all there. So that's good.
Yeah, the conversation's really lively. I get a lot of engagement. I have a much smaller following, so to speak, but the engagement's almost on par
Yeah,
with
well,
what I
it'll
get
take
from
some time
Twitter.
to get back to where you were.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's my point. I don't even need to get back to it. It's already just as
because
lively.
it's already interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Syer, thank you so
Thank you
much
very much
for your time. Happy holidays, everybody. Bye.
Bye.